Welcome to this Planning Commission work session. We are going over information for new and existing planning commissioners, and we welcome the public to participate. Guido, because I know I'm going to mispronounce your name again. So Guido, would you like to make any opening comments before we move forward?
No, just that every commission that I staff, I always try to make sure that they're properly trained up, because it helps the city make sure things are done procedurally correct. And we're fortunate to have Councilmember Biala here to help us with the training today. So thank you, Councilmember. And I'm really big about just, training up the commissions I work for, and then bringing items of interest. Last 2 weeks ago, we had the Cal State Monterey Bay Master Plan. And 2 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about ADUs and all the good work going on with ADUs in the community. So just trying to make sure that stuff is relevant to the commission and that you guys are fully trained up and aware of all the land use issues in your city. So.
Very good. Thank you. Kathy, do you have any remarks before we get started?
No, just to welcome the newest person, and I hope you find this very productive for you. Welcome.
Well, then we'll get started. And Guido, do you have the presentation that you can share? There we go. And I'm going to be doing the first section, which is your welcome to the Marina Planning Commission. And we're going to start with the Planning Commissioner's role. So if we can have the next slide, please. Okay, so you're going to learn about the duties of the Planning Commission.
Quick point of order, Chair.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but just because it's been agendized to, it looks like special announcements from the floor was agendized. And there's also one consent agenda item.
Yes, you are correct. I don't have the agenda in front of me. My mistake. So yes, we'll back up just a little bit, and we will do special announcements and communications from the floor. Please raise your hand if you have any announcements that public interest that you'd like to make at this time. And I am not seeing anybody. Okay, so we're going to move on to the consent agenda. There's only one item on it. That is the minutes of, boy, that's racing past me. The minutes of Thursday, April 14th. So is there any discussion on the minutes? Any errors that need to be corrected? If not, I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for April 14th, 2022. I do have just a really brief comment on them, though.
Oh, let's wait for a second. Is there a second on this? These are the minutes.
Yes, I second the motion.
Thank you. So there's been a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Brief comment from me, Chair. I noticed that the minutes are a little bit more brief this time, which I fully support and I think is great. Having said that, I just want to mention that the council last week had a comment about saving videos of the meetings now that we have that ability. And from just a personal commissioner's perspective, I want to kind of reiterate how important I think that is. And so because I know that the council tends to, and we have our liaison of the council here tonight. I just want to kind of put that on the floor that, especially when we have more brief minutes, which again, I think is the right thing to do. I think it makes it all that much more important that the city has some type of policy for preserving the videos for these meetings. And those are my only comments.
I'm going to respond to that. I used to be on the AMP board, and AMP always archived all of the videos. So you should still be able to go back many years and look up Planning Commission videos and other commissions as well as City Council. They're not held at the city. They've been held with AMP. Kathy, do you have a comment?
As a result of that discussion, the city has now changed that part of the website. So before you would click on where they wanted you to look at previous meetings, and you wouldn't find it. So they have now changed it, and so you now click on remote meetings, and then you click on the access to the past meetings, and then you will be able to see 3 years of posted AMP videos. And if you want it beyond that, it's a simple process of just requesting it, and they will give it to you. So that is all now accomplished, and it's easy to do.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Okay, so we're going to go on now to our presentation tonight for planning commissioners that are present. So Guido, if you can bring it up.
Sure.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So it's important to remember that the commission is an advisory board to the city council as it relates to planning and development. We do make some decisions, but even the decisions we make are appealable to the city council. So it's important when you're going through this that even when we are the decision maker, understand that the applicant can go through the process to appeal. So we want to be really careful that we're giving a fair hearing for the applicant and hopefully not have to have an appeal. Okay, let's move on. The areas of responsibility. The general plan, you know, it's funny, when I started out, I wasn't sure what a general plan was. And after being on the planning commission and many discussions, I realized that what it was in my mind, this is how I accepted a general plan, is it's a roadmap to the future of the community. It guides you in where you want to be. And sometimes the general plan is 10 years. In our community, it's 20, but ours is late. We still govern by the general plan. It is our major planning document. Within that, you're going to see specific plans as well, and that is for very specific areas. The Dunes has a specific plan. There are smaller subdivisions. The other divisions on the former Fort Ord all have their own specific plans, and that's the primary document. And it still has to, the specific plan still has to meet the criteria of the general plan. Then, of course, you have zoning and subdivision maps that we have to deal with. And I believe that our council, or excuse me, our planning commission has reviewed zoning and subdivision maps, except for our newest commissioner. So these are things that you will see. Part of what we do is updates for zoning and review of subdivision maps, and we do approvals for those. You'll see individual projects coming forward, and we will do approvals for those or disapprovals. Yes, you can disapprove a project, but you must have findings in order to do so. It's never about personal opinion. It is about what is best for the community. Does it meet the areas within the general plan or the specific plan? Does it meet zoning requirements? Those kinds of things. And if it doesn't, then disapproval is appropriate, sending it back. Or if it doesn't meet the intent. When I was on the commission before, one of the projects that came before us was a small project. And for their private open space, it was a multi-unit building. For their private open space, they had a very small area off the living room that might hold a barbecue. And it was the apartments were above the garages. That space went out over the driveway. And then the major outdoor space was off of the bedrooms. And that was 3 stories off the driveway. And in my mind and in the mind of other commissioners, that did not meet the intent for open space because it wasn't readily usable by families. You don't want a toddler going out unsupervised out of their bedroom onto something 3 stories high. And so we turned it down, but we turned it down with those findings. They did not come back and appeal it to the council. They instead adjusted their plan. So there are opportunities to make changes that are in the best interest of the community. We will be considering land acquisitions, and we will do special studies. When general plan comes through, those will be done through special studies. Okay, if I can have the next slide. And obviously this ethics, and this also includes work in the public interest, not your own, which I've gone into a little bit. And remember that just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. There was a great comment in here that says, an example, it may be legal for you to vote on your best friend's project, but people are going to question, are you doing that because it's your best friend's project? Or are you doing it because it's in the best interest of the community? And believe me, the newspapers, the media do report on these things. So it's really important that you think about, if my mother saw this, would she approve? Would she be proud to see you in the newspaper, or would she be embarrassed? It's a good tool to use in deciding whether or not you should, even if it's legal. There is required ethics training every 2 years. You have to take it. It's very important. It doesn't take that long. Sometimes it's done through the League of California Cities. Sometimes you do it online, and sometimes it's done by the staff. I think in the past few years, it's been done online. There are financial gain laws that require you to recuse yourself because you may have financial gain because of something that you're reviewing, or you may have financial negatives. You may be worried if this project goes in, your property value your property loses value. The FPPC, they're an important part of keeping the public informed of your ethics as it relates to your financial interests. So those are public records. You have to report every year by April 1st, and it does let the public know where you're receiving benefit. So if you own property for a business, you don't have to use your home in your reporting, but any other property. Maybe you have a rental property in Marina. And so you've got to report that. You've got to report your business, any financial assets that you have that may impact your decision-making. That's in that report. And it allows the public to know that you are in fact being fair and honest in your dealings with issues that come before you. And if you're unsure, you can always talk to the city attorney, always. That is something that some people think, well, the city attorney belongs to the council. It belongs to all of us who do the work of the city. So if you have questions, by all means, send an email to the city attorney and say, I'm just not sure how I'm supposed to deal with this. Do I need to recuse myself? Do I need to make some sort of a public statement? You know, he'll advise you on what to do. So can we have the next slide, please? The Effective Planning Commission. Remember to focus on the big picture. So even though you might be looking at a small project, how does that small project fit into the fabric of the community? That's really important. So focus on the big picture. Follow meeting procedures. We have policies. And in fact, they came in your handbook that we received this week. Make sure that we follow those procedures, points of order, when you make a motion, making sure that you arrive to your meetings on time, calling in to say, I can't be at the meeting. They're all part of the meeting procedures, and always follow the law. Now, the law could be state law, the law can be ordinances within the city, but always follow the law. Stay informed. That means reading your packet before attending the meeting. Keep your ear to what the public is saying. I know many of you are on Nextdoor or you're on Facebook, and those are resources, especially community pages on Facebook, for what people are thinking. It doesn't mean that their information is correct, but at least you know how the public feels about a variety of things, whether it's we're taking down trees or we're building too much, or so that you just have an idea of how they feel about it. And recently, we had some communication on Nextdoor regarding lot sizes. And so hearing that is important, but it's also important when a project comes forward to explain to people why lot sizes have been reduced. Open communication. Communication is two ways. And in this case, it's actually multiple ways. So it's open communication between commissioners, between commission and staff, between commission and the public. And part of communication is not what you say, it's what you hear. Always remember to listen, and you don't have to agree, but you need to listen with an open mind. I found I learned more from the public my first 2 years on the commission than I learned from reading material, because the public had ideas about how to go forward that I would have never thought of. And so I really appreciated that. Keep an efficient pace. And that, as chair, is my responsibility, but I think it's also the responsibility of every commissioner. If you're prepared, you're going to ask your questions, you're going to know what your questions are. If something comes up in discussion that you have more you want to speak to, you will have that opportunity. Take a few notes so that you know what you want to say when you're recognized. And it will also help if you communicate your questions in advance to our planning staff. That will help move things along. It's not don't ask them in the meeting. It's important to ask all your questions in the meeting, but staff will then be prepared to answer those questions publicly because you've already asked them privately. And again, as I said, it's my job to keep things moving. Okay, next item, next screen. Thank you. The working relationship. Working with other commissioners. This is really about being professional, being courteous, again, listening, follow your adopted policies and procedures. That means Robert's Rules of Order or circumvented by our own policies. So be familiar with them. They are in the binder. Follow common goals as expressed in the general plan and other planning documents. These are essential tools for guiding your discussion, both your questions and your comments on any project that comes forward. Because we have a responsibility to ensure that any project that comes forward is in line with the general plan, the specific plan, zoning, and if not, then the applicant is going to ask for some sort of a variance. And we would have to discuss that, knowing what the general plan is and what the other planning documents may be that are involved. Solve problems by listening, considering alternatives, and importantly, arriving at consensus. It is so much better when a body moves forward in agreement with a 7-0 vote, or in the case of the council with a 5-0 vote, than being split. When you are split, you're sending a mixed message to the public. You have said, we really didn't solve this issue appropriately because we don't agree. You're not always going to agree 100%, but by working hard to reach consensus, you are showing the public that you are working in their interest, not your own. Okay, next slide, please. So you have a responsibility to work with the planning staff. Now, I've gone over some of this already. Read the agenda in advance, ask questions and alert them to concerns you will raise in a meeting. And it's okay to disagree with the staff recommendation. Some think that all we do is rubber stamp what staff has recommended. We don't have to do that, but we need to be able to say very clearly and respectfully why those are called findings. Findings can give you the way to move forward with a project, or they can give you the way to stop a project. And it is never enough to say, I just don't like the project. That is not a legal standing, and we need to make sure that we follow the law. And when possible, please compliment staff when it's appropriate. They work very hard at what they do. This is the thing they've been educated in. They're far more knowledgeable than any of us. And so it's really important to recognize that and say, thank you for a job well done. Okay, if we can move on to working with City Council. This is where Kathy can be a huge help to us, as she is our liaison and can guide us through the council priorities and help us in that sense with making our decisions. Are we in line with the priorities and policies that the council has set for the coming year? And when we have had a vote that said, no, we need to send, and it is appealed, we need to send a representative to the council from our commission to let them know why we voted no, what the difficulties were. They can disagree with us and move forward with it, or they can address those difficulties and make changes. Are you raising your hand? Attend joint meetings. That's another one that sometimes commissioners have a problem with because they really consider them council meetings. And do I really have a voice? And is what I say important? It's very important. You are representing, I'm going to call it the legal view of something coming forward. In other words, you are governed solely by documents, laws, ordinances, and you're not engaged in the, I'm running for election in another year, and what are my constituents going to think? They have to deal with public policy as well. It's not that we don't deal with the public, but it doesn't have the same kind of influence that it has on an elected official. We're appointed. So it's really important. You're going to bring things to the table that the council may not consider. We're very fortunate that at least we have 3 members on our council that have spent time as commissioners as well, but that's not always the case. Some people run for public office without ever having sat on a commission. So you do bring something different to the table. And please understand the political pressures that council members have to consider when they deliberate. You will find that there are times when you say, why did we spend all those weeks, all those meetings on this project, trying to make it the best possible, and then the council doesn't like it? They have political pressures that we don't. And they're going to see things that we don't see with those same eyes. And so be respectful, understand they are listening to you. There's just more that they have to consider. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Oh, time for Q&A. So we can either do Q&A at the end of each one of the presentations, or we can wait and do it after the fact. And I'm seeing Glenn. I think he is on the phone, so he had to take a business call. Okay, so next, I believe, is Kathy. Am I correct?
I
No,
think it's
Brian. Brian is next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your
And I'm-
presentation. I feel like I learned actually a lot just listening to what I know we just listened to a couple years ago. So I really appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion tonight. And I kind of want to say that all of our information came from the Planning Commissioner's Handbook, which is a publication of the Institute for Local Government, or the League of California Cities. And if you haven't taken a look at that as a commissioner, I really encourage that you do that, and then do it again in 6 months, because I find that when I review the information, something else pops out that didn't really make sense the first time around, but after 6 months of decisions and discussion, it makes a lot more sense reading it a second time around. So I'll go ahead and get started. I'm doing part 2, which talks a little bit about meetings and format, and Brown Act a little bit. And so there's several types of meetings that both the City Council and the Planning Commission will have. The first type is called a regular meeting. And those meetings are defined at set intervals throughout the year. So for Planning Commission, it's the second and, I think I'm saying this right, the second and fourth Thursday of every month.
Yep.
And so that calendar is kind of set throughout the year at a regular time. And then those are noticed 72 hours before the meeting. In Marina, we have 3 different noticing spots. I think the library, the intersection of Del Monte and Reservation in front of the fast food restaurant there. And I think the other one is in front of City Hall. And then, of course, the meetings are noticed online now too. You know, the noticing requirement to have a physical noticing spot probably comes from a time before the internet was so readily accessible. The second type of meeting is called a special meeting. And those are meetings that might have something where 72-hour notice might present a challenge to have those discussions. And so the noticing requirement for special meetings is only 24 hours. And those are generally thought to have items on them that are of, more urgent, and again, just can't wait until the next regular meeting. And then you also have work sessions, which is what we're having tonight. It's kind of a little bit more of an informal discussion. You're generally not taking action on anything. You're receiving a lot of information, and kind of we don't follow as strict of a process. Discussion questions are encouraged in work sessions. You should remember that meetings are usually televised, and they might have a really broad audience. So we talked earlier today that we're asking for meetings to be archived for a very long time. People can always go back and look at what you said and how you acted and how you behaved, and even what you wore, right? If you decide to wear an eccentric Hawaiian shirt, people are going to have a record of that. So just kind of keep that in mind, that what you say in these meetings, kind of follows you along. I think in the past, every jurisdiction has had folks that haven't taken that advice, and it may come back to bite you. So next slide. Prepare for meetings. Chair Amadeo spoke about this. It's so important. As soon as you get your agenda packet on a Thursday or Friday, and I think staff has been really good about getting those out, take a look at it. I always try to take a look, or at least review the agenda immediately, get a sense for what items are on that agenda and how much homework I might have to do over the weekend. I always try to allow, several hours over that weekend to really dig into those items. And then depending on what I find, and how much additional work I feel like I need to spend reviewing the item, then I'll set that time aside as well. But you really shouldn't wait until Wednesday or even Tuesday of the following week to kind of look at these items. It probably does you a disservice and doesn't allow you to make a really informed decision. So again, I really encourage people, look at the agenda as soon as it comes out and plan to spend some time that following weekend reviewing the item. I always like to tell people, look for public notices in the newspaper. Historically, we haven't always had a good feel for what was coming before us. And our first opportunity to understand some of those things was actually seeing the public notice in the newspaper ourselves. So it's always a good spot for not only our jurisdiction, but for neighboring jurisdictions to kind of understand what's going on and what's going to be coming before us. I know I'm jumping around a little bit. The fourth item there is talks about the difference between the items that we see. Most items are going to fall, and this is really important actually, most items are going to fall in one of two categories, and that is quasi-judicial or quasi-legislative acts. And I think the quasi comes from because we aren't judges, right? So we're kind of like in the role of a judge, but we're not. And the same with legislative acts. I mean, we're not technically legislators, but we are in that role sometimes. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this. And this is directly from the Planning Commissioner's Handbook. They talk about what's the difference between legislative and quasi-judicial items. Legislative decisions involve policy choices that apply to a broad class of landowners. Examples include decisions to adopt general plans and zoning ordinances. More examples are zoning code amendments, zoning map amendments, special plan adoption, annexations, and development agreements. Quasi-judicial decisions, and this is probably a large majority of what we hear, are administrative decisions that involve individual projects that are being considered for approval, conditional approval, or denial based on criteria previously established by some legislative action. Examples include zoning permits, entitlements such as variances, coastal zone permits, subdivision maps, certificates of compliance, CEQA decisions requiring hearings and evidence. And so this is really important because in a future slide, I'll talk a little bit about ex parte or ex parte communication and why that generally only applies to quasi-judicial decisions. And I just want to give a couple examples that we recently on this commission heard. There was a time when we looked at a zoning amendment, and we had, some of you may remember, I kind of made a big deal about not calling the individual that wanted that amendment an applicant, but rather a petitioner. Because applicant generally refers to a quasi-judicial decision. And in this case, it was a zoning amendment that really affected the whole city. And our job as a commission was to make the decision on this zoning amendment, how it would affect the whole city, not on the behalf of one individual. Whereas with quasi-judicial, you generally have an applicant and you're making a decision that affects only that applicant. And so the last item does talk about ex parte. I've heard it pronounced both ex parte and ex parte, so I usually say ex parte, and site visits. Again, ex parte is from the Latin word that means from one side only. And in quasi-judicial decisions, we want to make sure that our decision is based off of everything in the record. In other words, everything that we know, the entire public should know as well. And so if we're talking to people outside of a meeting, it's not to say that you can't do that, but that should be part of the record. It should be disclosed, and the public should understand what you understand. And that kind of segues into this idea of site visits. So site visits can be discouraged by some jurisdictions. And I want to read, if I can find real quick, what the planning handbook says about site visits. So it says site visits sometimes raise concerns. The visit provides you with an opportunity to draw conclusions outside of the hearing process. So for example, if a neighboring owner is concerned about traffic congestion and you visit the property on a Sunday and there's no traffic, well, then the record might assume that you think there's never any traffic. And because you didn't disclose that you visited the site on to step in and say, well, well, wait a minute, that's not a typical site visit. So you can do a site visit. You should just disclose that visit. And did I hear someone with a comment?
I was just going to let you know, when you said Sunday, your screen froze, as did the audio. So we didn't hear what you said after doing a site visit on a Sunday and there was no traffic.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll repeat that part. So the reason disclosing site visits are important, or one of the reasons, or the example that I'll give is, if you visit a site on a Sunday and the issue is concerning traffic, and you don't see any traffic on a Sunday, the record may not reflect that. And the record needs to understand the conditions under how you are forming your decision. Whereas if you say, hey, I visited this site on a Sunday and there was no traffic, then the public or the applicant has the opportunity to come in and say, okay, that's great. But guess what? On a Sunday, we know there's never any traffic. We wish you would have went on a Monday or a Tuesday or during the week. So again, just important, site visits are okay, but you need to disclose when you visit, how you visit, and if you visit. It's always a good idea, especially for quasi-judicial hearings. Okay, next slide, please. Conflicts of interest. We talk a little bit about abstentions and disqualifications. I'll talk about disqualifications first. The most common disqualification, and it's automatic across the board, is if you live or have a financial interest within 500 feet of a quasi-judicial project. My understanding is there's under no circumstance are you supposed to participate in that decision if you meet that criteria. Now, that's not the only criteria. You know, if you feel you have a bona fide conflict of interest in something, right? Maybe Joby Aviation is starting a project and you're a large stockholder. That would be a conflict of interest, and you would need to disclose that and disqualify yourself. Abstentions are a little bit more rare. You can abstain. There's various reasons why you might want to abstain. And really, if you're going to choose to abstain, I think you should share with the commission why you're choosing to abstain. I don't have any really good examples for abstentions, but maybe you didn't read the packet, you just didn't have time, you didn't feel like you were informed enough to make a decision. You're not voting against it, you're not voting for it, you just don't feel like you can vote at all. But again, if you're going to choose to abstain, best practice is to disclose those reasons for abstaining. We talked about bona fide conflicts. You really do have a duty to render a decision. So you shouldn't abstain just because you haven't done your homework. I mean, your duty is to do your homework and to make a decision. That's why you've been appointed to this board. The city council and decision makers have really put a lot of trust in all of us to render that duty. So, and I don't think that's been a problem with this commission. I've seen others where folks, tend to abstain or not vote quite a bit because politically they don't want to take a position. And generally, that's not what we're here to do. We should be rendering a decision. The last item, we do serve the council, but decisions are ours and ours alone. So I think that's something that's sometimes challenging for us to grapple with. We are, the old planning commissioner's handbook actually said the planning commission serves at, I forget what the word is there, but they serve the council. And that is true, but that doesn't mean that we should make a decision because we think the council wants us to make a certain decision. It is our decision, and our moral compass and the information we receive in the meeting should drive that decision and nothing else. All right, next slide. Talk a little bit about basic meeting format. And I think Chair Amadeo spoke about this a little bit. But the meeting is usually called to order. There's a roll call, establishment of quorum. There's usually consent items. Consent items, if there's multiple items, are approved in one fell swoop, although individual items can be pulled for discussion if there's any concern. We always have public announcements and public comments. We have a very generous 4 minutes here in the city of Marina. largest public comment period of any city or jurisdiction that I'm aware of in the area. And then we have items. And so this item is really for quasi-judicial items, because remember, quasi-legislative items don't really have applicants per se. So this is primarily for quasi-judicial, but it's very similar for legislative items as well. We start with a staff report. We ask questions about that staff report. We really try to limit just questions and just about what you've heard in the staff report. Then typically we give the applicant an opportunity to present. The commission can question the applicant after that. And then we open it up for public comment. We try to get responses from staff and the applicant on public comment, and then the commission may ask additional questions as well. Then there's usually some discussion about everything that's been heard in the hearing, and then a motion and a vote. Next item, or next slide. Commissioner comments, that last step there, just keep in mind that the comments should be brief, and they should be about the item. It's not an opportunity for us as commissioners to tell the rest of the commission how much we know about something, or unless, we feel that it'll strongly influence the outcome of a decision. But it's really about making comments that are pertinent to that particular decision so that we can go to a vote. Just remember, it's not about you, it's about the actual decision that we're making. Chair Amadeo did mention, in the absence of some other kind of rule, we typically follow Robert's Rules of Order. I don't think we've officially adopted that. But if you don't know what Robert's Rules of Order is, it'd be a good idea to kind of review some of that, because it can be very helpful. So an example that I recently heard was, I heard the city council say as many secondary motions can be on the floor as requested. Well, Robert's Rules of Order says only a maximum of 2, but again, we don't necessarily follow Robert's Rules of Order exactly. So ultimately, it's really up to the chair. But it's always a good idea to know the procedure, so that if there is a kind of a bone of contention, you can have an intelligent conversation about it. Next slide. And that's it from me. Any questions at this point, or we can wait till the end? But if you have something fresh in your mind now, might be a good time, Chair. It's up to you.
And I would entertain questions, but I don't see any hands raised at this point.
Yeah, Chair Amadeo, I did want to clarify some of the vice chair's comments. So
That would be fine. I didn't see your hand, but I will recognize you anyway. Thank you, Guido.
So the vice chair brought up the ex parte. Yeah, I mean, even if it's a legislative act, if there is a zone change involved, or there's a general plan amendment involved, like we were saying, there's the minimum legal threshold. Oftentimes there'll be a project where somebody will build a building and they'll also do a zone change or legislative act. So if you have a communication with the applicant, petitioner, or whatever you want to call it, we just want you to disclose it. That, and then the vice chair did bring up a good point. In Los Altos, where I came from, the site visits were a cultural norm there. And Brian brought up a good point, is some of the planning commissioners would go out, and then either people for or against the project would start to chat up the commissioners. And so they kind of wanted to go check it out. They didn't really want to talk to a lot of people. They just wanted to really visit the site. So he brought up a good point. Just like if you have somebody comes up and talks to you, hey, I really hate this project, I hope it doesn't get built, or yeah, I'm really for it. Yeah, you should just disclose that just to be safe. So yeah, I just wanted to, and then I did want to go back, because I did have this happen in Los Altos. There were a couple times where the planning commission there wanted to add a very unique condition to a project. And I almost had an applicant appeal something to the council there because we didn't give the applicant an opportunity to, do you agree with that condition? Is that reasonable for you? So I have asked, since I started here, that if there is some type of unique condition, at least to give the applicant an opportunity to, do we agree with that? Yes or no? And if they really, really strongly oppose it, either have the discussion that night, because that could save an appeal. And obviously they have the right to appeal anyways, but hopefully we can establish that as a cultural norm here. So.
And I would add to that, we actually went through something like that with the, what was it called? Quick
Quick.
car wash, yes. Because we did have concerns over the extreme, bright colored everywhere building. And so we had some findings that, or excuse me, some conditions of approval. And, but with each one of those conditions, we asked the applicant, can you do this? There were some things they couldn't do. They couldn't tone down, for instance, the colors, because those are the colors for their product, but they could limit the amount of color. So,
Perfect.
by
Yeah.
talking to the applicant, letting them know our concerns, what we were planning on for conditions, allowing them to speak to that, we came with something that avoided an appeal.
Great.
Brian, you have your hand up. And I'm sorry, I keep saying first names. Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm all for whatever's most efficient. So please never feel sorry, but I appreciate that. I did just kind of want to follow up. And I think Guido and staff is right. I mean, staff works so hard, and really they're not required to, but they do to protect both us and the city from getting into trouble, right? I mean, and so I really appreciate that. And I think Guido's right. I mean, it's really a golden rule thing, right? If you were not on the commission, I think you need to think about how would you want to be treated if an item was coming before a body. And I think that almost always involves as much disclosure as possible, whether it's required or not. And usually it is required. But I think disclosure is really an important piece of that. And I appreciate the comments that staff made on that.
Okay, if we have nothing else there, then we move on to our Community Development Director. He is our next presenter. So Guido, take it away. And like I said, I don't want to mispronounce your name.
Oh, it's fine. Guido Persicone, that's fine. So I've been asked to do the community design and application review. I only have 3 or 4 slides, so I might just speak a little bit more extemporaneously. So kind of what goes into our review? Well, within the last couple of years, our review has been limited a little bit by some of the housing bills that have been adopted. But in general, as the commissioner, as the chair has mentioned, you know, we do look to the general plan. We do look to the zoning code. The zoning code is the document that implements the general plan. There are several specific plans in Marina. Those also give us guidance. And within those policy documents, we look for what are the parking requirements? What are the landscaping requirements? What's the topography of the site? What's the building and architecture? Coming before the commission in a couple months, you'll be starting to work on objective zoning standards. And that does further refine by state law some of these criteria that we're going to have to more clearly define in our zoning code. What's the lighting? We don't want to produce unnecessary glare or light impacts onto abutting properties. The buffering comment here, you know, is the use somebody is proposing appropriate for that site in terms of how close is it to a school or a daycare or residential? You know, if you have a heavy industrial use that produces a lot of noise, that's something you don't necessarily want near residential properties because there's some incompatibilities there. You know, is there a loading zone for the commercial properties? What is the circulation? Obviously, the unholy trinity of public hearings is parking, noise, and traffic. Those are the 3 that come up at every meeting. So what is the traffic circulation patterns for a project? Conservation and energy. Every 3 years, the building code gets updated and there's more and more stringent requirements for the building code? Are they meeting those minimum requirements? For housing, we are mandated by the state to provide our regional fair share for housing. So is a project providing the below market rate units that we mandate by our code here? So those are just some of the many factors that we review. And a good staff report, and hopefully that's what I'm pushing the staff to do, will lay out, yes, the project is, let's say it's 90% compliant with all of our codes. But what we try to do in our staff reports is to say it's generally compliant, but there's one or two issues that maybe the staff couldn't come to an agreement with the applicant on, and here's the issue, and we wanted the commission's input on. Urban building facade. This is the kind of stuff that the commission will be working on. Christie's working on an RFP as we speak. Objective zoning standards do kind of limit, after January 1st, 2020, this type of urban work. But we do have to, as you can see from this sketch, there are specific criteria within a zoning code for objective standards that we have to adopt if we want to have a specific look and feel for a marina. No longer can we get away with just saying it's a pedestrian scale building. That's kind of old school. That's before all the Housing Accountability Act bills got signed. We need to clearly articulate what exactly does that mean. So if it's pedestrian scaled, that means the sidewalk's a certain size. It probably has some type of awning. The setback is closer to the property line. And those are all clear objective standards that we have to show in our code and be able to give an applicant of what exactly we're asking for. In terms of community design and application, that will come through our objective standards, through our zoning code, through the specific plan. I'm currently working on the downtown plan. And we have to be very, very, once again, specific about the design standards that we use. And that concludes my presentation. I would say I do really enjoy my job. A lot of the stuff that we went over, it's very, it's very fascinating for me. I've probably written at this point, probably 50 or so ordinances. And it's always interesting to me writing the ordinances. I've written general plans, and then the rubber meets the road when an applicant is in front of you at the front counter and says, hey, I want to build this building. And it's your job as a city planner to try to articulate to them why or why not their particular project may or may not fit with the city that you're working for. And so it brings in a lot of the design stuff that we just spoke about. There is a political element to the job that I do find fascinating. But then it's also your work as a planning commissioner that's really important, because you really are the eyes and ears of the city. You've been here a lot longer than I'll ever be, and you'll have a better sense for your city in Marina. How do these design standards for this particular project, if it does or doesn't fit? So that's why your role is so important for these projects, because you live with these buildings way after I leave the city and long after I'm gone. So your input on the planning commission is very, very important to us as staff members. So.
If you don't mind, I'd like to add one little comment to
Sure.
that. And that is, even as planning commissioners, we're not planning for the city today. We're always looking to the future. What is the future going to look like? I may be long gone, and when I say long gone, in the ground before our downtown is completed. So we're really looking as what we are doing is for the next generation. And not just that generation, but the generations that follow. And with your general plan being a 20-year plan, you can at least look at this has to meet that for the next 20 years. So don't think about today, think about the future when you're making decisions as a planning commissioner. Are there any questions before we move on? I don't see any, so let's move on.
I have a quick question.
Oh, I'm
here,
sorry, I didn't see your hand.
And I hope I'm not monopolizing. I hope my fellow board members will ask questions as well if they have any. But I wanted to ask, just because we talked a little bit about ministerial, and I noticed in this year's Planning Commissioner's Handbook, they actually add that word ministerial as kind of a new class of meeting item, in addition to judicial and legislative. And kind of what they talk about is that some cities, even though those items might be ministerial, they still have them come before the Planning Commission, is what my interpretation of what I read was. And so I guess my question is, in the city of Marina, I don't think that happens right now. So that's question number one. Is that true? And then the other question is, when we talk about ministerial, we get this sense that we're really following a very strict set of subjective guidelines. And I'm wondering if, Guido, maybe you could talk a little bit about what the opposite of that is. So in other words, everything else we see that isn't ministerial, kind of what makes it not ministerial? Why is it so much more subjective? And what are those subjective areas that we're kind of looking at?
All right, well, let me step back for the newer commissioner. So, because the vice chair is, so there's a legislative act that's a zone change or a general plan amendment or a specific plan or a general plan. Most of what the Planning Commission does is quasi judicial, which is conditional use permits and design review and tentative map type of work. What the vice chair is bringing up is ministerial permits. Those are basically building permits, ADUs. I'm going to be changing the code because I don't think you guys really want to look at sign permits anyways. Those should be a ministerial permit. Those are basically, if you meet the criteria, basically the city has to give you the building, or it has to give you the permit. And so that's what the vice chair is referencing. In terms of the second part of your question, Vice Chair, you were asking about, are there things that we, so for example, ADUs, way back when I started, actually those used to go to Planning Commission. That was a subjective conditional use permit. And then in 2003, there was the first major overhaul of the ADU laws. And then there was another one in 2008, another one in 2016, and another one in 2018. And so all of those changes to ADU law, now it is a ministerial permit, meaning if you meet the requirements of state law, for all intents and purposes, the city has to grant you your ADU. And so that's the kind of stuff that you guys don't see. So yeah, that answers your question.
I think so. I guess just to kind of reiterate, so with subjective issues, which most of them are that we see in a commission meeting, things like the neon green, even though we don't have a guideline that says you can't use that, it would be detrimental to the flow of harmony or whatever, but that would be a legitimate finding. We would be allowed to make that finding in a subjective review. Is that right? Or
yes and no, because of the changes to housing law. So they've under the Housing Accountability Act changes, you are allowed to have subjective criteria as part of your review, but they changed it, but you can't just deny a project purely based on subjective standards. And now you have to make findings of fact as to why you're denying the project. So the burden has shifted now to the cities, especially if it's a multifamily housing project.
I'm sorry, I guess I meant it like non-qualified housing projects. So commercial buildings or, streets or whatever it might be, is I guess where I was going with that. Would we still be allowed to use very broad subjective guidelines?
You are allowed to use subjective standards, but that cannot be the sole basis of your denial.
Okay.
You need to make the findings of fact that are in your zoning code recommending denial.
Okay, thank you.
So, for example, back in the day when I would be a planner, people would say, well, I don't really like that project because it doesn't feel like downtown. And, 10, 15 years ago, maybe that would pass muster. But now you need to say, I don't think that project fits within downtown because The stairwell is too tall. The building is too tall based on the other buildings around it. It doesn't have enough landscaping, and there's not enough parking based on the parking ordinance, right? You have to be very specific now moving forward as to why you're denying a project.
So can I ask a question related to
sure.
that? Vice Chair McCarthy, are you done? Or in other words, should I wait to ask my question? Do
No,
you-
I'm finished. Thank you so much, Chair.
Okay. So is this why things like design guidelines are very important, because they can actually give you the reason to deny, say for a downtown building, you have specific design guidelines. It doesn't meet those design guidelines. It's 4 feet.
Exactly. And that's why I'm really fortunate to have Christy on the staff. We're about 2 years behind here in getting the objective standards adopted. If somebody were to file for a multifamily or a mixed use project without those objective standards, we have less ability to help regulate the design. But once we get those adopted, we can then tell the customer, your window needs to be inset 12 inches versus 6, or, the new design guidelines say the landscaping has to be 50% of the front yard. You only have 45%, right? So that's why the project she's working on is really important for the city.
Great. I almost called you Commissioner, Councilmember Biala.
Yeah, and when we call them guidelines, that in itself tells me that it is not strictly criteria that must be applied. So I know that even in the downtown specific plan, there were many things that we could only say were recommended, or there was some lighter adjectives or verbs, and then we were working towards saying shall or will or must, and those were the only ones that I was under the impression that we could actually use as findings. All the other things were, as the title suggests, guidelines, and so I'm glad we're trying to reinforce more language like that. But I think at some point there are things that are just guidelines, and unfortunately we can't codify.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Yeah, and actually that's a really good point, council member, that when we're bringing ordinances to you guys for review, make sure you double check our work. Make sure we have those shalls and those wills. Flowery language, like we like it to be like downtown. No, that doesn't work. We need to be like you're saying, that window shall be 5 feet away from the side yard, right? That kind of very clear directive, because quite honestly, I've gotten into major tussles with large developers where they'll say, well, that's nice that you did that in that other city, Guido, but it doesn't say I have to do it. And then I have to kind of end up negotiating on every little. So yeah, that's a really good point from the council member. So.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, I don't see any more hands, then we will move on to, and I almost said Commissioner again, to Councilmember Biala for her portion of the presentation tonight.
Great, thank you, Chair Madeo. So this is part 4, the last part, and there are 2 topics. Essentially, is the public participation in land use planning, and then general tips for new commissioners. And both of these things come from materials that were distributed by the League of Cities. So, and I think that this topic of public participation is really important for the city of Marina. As Commissioner McCarthy said, we have 4 minutes, and that should tell you that that's extraordinary in terms of our region. I think that all the public that has participated, whether it's at council or commission, I think we really welcome them, and we really are patient if there's technical difficulties, et cetera, and we really listen. I feel like all of us on commissions and the council really do get information, valuable information and input from the public. So I think this is a very important topic for us as a city. Next slide. So here's the in a nutshell, the importance of public participation, and it is actually cemented in the Brown Act. But when I go walking, no matter where in the city, and if somebody knows that I'm associated with the council, I get the questions of, well, what's happening over there? Is this coming here? And, when is it going to be, on the council? When is it going to be approved? When is it going to start being built? And so this is the kind of thing that the Brown Act was originally made for. And it says in the Brown Act that its intent is to provide public access to meetings of California local governmental agencies. That means all of us, the commission, the council. Its purpose is described in the act. The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies, meaning commission and council, which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. And those are very strong and very clear words that show the intent of the Brown Act. And I want to say, as an example, and I'll try to use examples in this presentation of things that I've experienced. And this happened before I was ever on the Planning Commission. And the Dunes casual dining project was coming before the Planning Commission. And I remember that there were many of us from the public that had concerns about the plan that had that property lower than the street level. So it was going to be like the REI, pretty sunken down, right? And I think that when you drive by now, you know what the conclusion was. So these kinds of things that can come before us in public participation can make a huge difference to some of the very important projects in our city. Next slide. Open meeting requirements. Now, Commissioner McCarthy went over some of these. But I want to read this part. In order to achieve the objectives of the Brown Act, governmental bodies subject to the requirements of the Brown Act must provide public notice of their meetings, post agendas of the subjects to be discussed at those meetings, and provide public access to those meetings. Public notice of every meeting subject to the Brown Act is required, and access is mandatory unless the meeting is held in a closed session under specific exemptions. So again, the strong language, this is why this Brown Act was so very important. This means that all city business must be conducted in an open and public meeting, and meeting is defined as any situation involving a majority of planning commissioners in which business is discussed or done. And why is that important? Once a majority of people on the commission or council have talked to each other and they now feel confident that they have the more than a majority, then they can pass anything, right? So this is the core of why the Brown Act is so important. It prevents that predetermined majority vote, and it is a high bar. There are exceptions to meetings, and it could be for educational workshops, social or ceremonial events. In fact, many of the council members attended a very large gala festival honoring the founder and benefactor of the Monterey Aquarium, as well as the retirement of CSUMB president. No business is talked about, but we can meet, and it still is acceptable under the Brown Act. Now, the Brown Act applies to commissioner behavior and is not meant in any way to restrict the public access to public officials. I heard one time that a member of the public attempted to contact one of the public officials and was told that they couldn't speak because it was a violation of the Brown Act. So this person felt, in somehow being a member of the public, that they had the ability to violate the Brown Act. And that is not true. The public is free to speak to any and all public officials. Now, there are cautions, of course, if there are, as we've been talking about, quasi-judicial matters. And I want to give you, an analogy. So let's say you're a defendant in some kind of court case, and you look over there and you see the judge talking to the opponent. How do you feel? You feel, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose. That there's something rigged about this. There is some kind of communications, and I don't know what they are, but I feel really concerned about it. And it's like Commissioner Chair Amadeo said, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. I think that this is why we are so careful about ex parte communication. But it is not legal, and if you choose to speak to a member of the public or even the applicant who is part of the public on a quasi-judicial matter, you must disclose your communications. And we'll talk a little bit more of this later, and certainly Commissioner McCarthy spoke at length about that. Next slide, please. The public has a right and expectation for unbiased and fair hearings. Remember that we talked about the definition of a meeting from the Brown Act. It has to be less than a majority, less than a quorum. And for the Planning Commission, you have 7 members. So a new person like Richard, a quorum, less than a quorum is 3 commissioners, right? So you can speak with 2 other commissioners and still be under a quorum. For the city council, we only have 5. So as a council person, I can only talk to 1 more person and to be under the quorum. So you do have a little bit more of a leeway there. There is something called the daisy chain that is talked about in the Brown Act. And again, I want to stress this because it's not the public that makes the daisy chain violation. This is when a quorum of commissioners or council has ideas about how the others are going to vote without even sitting and talking to them, okay, or being in a group of any kind. And this happens if we do something that communicates to a person of the public or an applicant that we have an idea and already a predetermined opinion that we think we're going to vote this way. And when we say that, then that can get transferred by the public going and legitimately talking to all the other commissioners or councils, and they can say, oh, I'm aware that, commissioner is going to be voting this way. How do you think you feel about it? So now we are starting to build a kind of consensus that could tip the balance at the actual vote. So we have to be cautious again about our ex parte, but if we stay with within the rules of that ex parte, if we choose to do them, that we're primarily there to listen, to ask questions, but never to communicate how we are going to vote on that item in the hearing. Next. So here's what I had talked about, that applicants also are members of the public and we should treat them the same. So we're not singling out developers as necessarily nefarious or deceptive, that whatever applies to the public and how we treat them is also how we should treat the applicants. So the first sentence says discussions with applicants before the hearing is not prohibited. Not prohibited. That means, that's implying then you can do it, right? But again, that poses some very important cautions. And I think we've already talked about what ex parte communication means. It means one-sided. And so when you're making a decision on something and you've already had a one-sided discussion or one-sided information inflow, that is not what we want to do. If you disclose, if you have had conversations, then you say it before the item is brought up, is begun, and you say that I want to make an ex parte disclosure, and I spoke to so-and-so on this day and from this time. For me, it's important to know whether it was a 10-minute discussion or whether it was a 2-hour meeting. And we discussed X, Y, and Z. So now everybody has the same information. I think we heard about the disclosure of site visits. On Sunday, I went and there was no traffic. very important information when maybe what heretofore you might have been hearing was, oh, it's always crowded and there's lots of traffic all the time there. But until you get that bit of information, you might now start thinking in a different way. Now, there are many different ways to treat ex parte communication. For example, the Coastal Commission, which is under the same Brown Act laws because it's a state law, right? They have a rule that, and I believe it was 3 months before a hearing, no ex parte communication should be enacted by any of the commissioners. But each person outside of that can make their own decisions if it's longer than 3 months. And they actually post who on the commission will accept ex parte and who won't. Okay, so it is an individual decision as well. And this happens in Marina as well. You know that there are people who really curtail any discussions with the public, for example, or the applicants. And then there are some council people or commissioners who feel much more able to entertain conversations with both the public and an applicant if they disclose properly. Okay, it is not illegal, and you can modify some of the misperceptions through that. Now, there are some bodies that have policies on ex parte. Marina doesn't, so this might be forthcoming in the future, because it would be very good if we're saying that ex parte communication disclosures need to occur with quasi-judicial matters, but we're thinking, are we always so sure what a quasi-judicial matter looks like? I mean, sometimes it looks like a legislative and it might be a quasi-judicial, or we're not sure if the issue that we're voting on is going to be appealed. And so that's maybe one of the things that might be helpful for both the council and for both and for the commission, is to have a heads up about what matters we're voting on can be appealed or qualify as a quasi-judicial matter. Next. Commissioners as members of the public. Because we are commissioners doesn't mean that we left all of our rights at the door, that we still can have our opinions heard, and there are ways to do it. First, when I say step down, we could step down as commissioners or council on other topics that are not related to the body. For example, I have seen people from the dais step down to be able to talk about a political candidate, for example. Or you can step down because you actually are thinking you have a conflict of interest. And as we talked about earlier, conflict of interest usually relates to financial benefit. There are many times when you think, well, maybe this is a conflict of interest because, you know, that person is my neighbor, and, you know, and you may get the advice from the city council that no, you don't have to recuse yourself. You don't have to step down. You still can vote because you don't have a financial interest in that, and there isn't that level of a need to step down. The difference, we talked also about abstentions. Please know that stepping down because of conflict of interest is different than abstaining from a vote. Conflict of interest means that you do not have the ability to participate in the vote. Abstention means you have the ability to participate and you declined to register yes or no. Those very different scenarios. Next slide. Hosting and following the agenda. I think we have covered up a lot of this. So the public has the right to know and participate. Postings on the agenda at least 72 hours ahead of time. Every planning commission meeting must include time for public comment. I made a mistake here. It says before the motion, and that is actually not what is in our current rules and procedure. It is after the motion. Now, most bodies in our region allow public comment before the motion, and technically for maybe it's just for the council. Is that, okay, so this is correct for the planning commission, sorry. And hopefully the council will consider moving to that, that same format, because it feels like we need to start considering consistency, but also talk about the reasonings for that. Let's see. The public has the right to written documents or recordings after the meetings. We talked about the AMP, and it's much easier now to access that on going to the remote meetings and then clicking on access and view meetings. We also have public records requests, and there's a form posted on our city, and the city has 10 days to comply or respond to the request. It doesn't mean in 10 days they have to produce the documents that you wish. All information made available to commissioners must be available to the public. You know, we have a policy that says you can submit written comments through the email up to 5 o'clock on the of the meeting date. So we get those late comments sent to us by our email. And if you look on the website, go to those remote meeting tab and access and view meetings, and look on the, I believe it's on the right side, written public comments received. So you can click on that and you will see them all there. So again, the emphasis on the importance of public comment is always here. Special notices are given to residents in the vicinity of proposed projects. For example, the 94-unit apartment complex that was approved on Del Monte, lots of notices were sent out. Nothing should be a surprise either on the agenda or on the postings that would leave the public in the dark. We want everything to be accessible to the public. Next slide. How to encourage public participation. We have the 4 minutes. I have very rarely in probably 6 years seen that we've truncated that 4 minutes. I think there's been only one time I remember when there was 120 people wishing to speak that we limited it to 2 minutes. But other than that, I think that we really try to accommodate the public and be welcoming to public input. We have to acknowledge that, you know, that the top fears of any person is fear of heights and fear of public speaking. I have to say 10 years ago, I made my first public speaking in Seaside City Council on a development there. I'm telling you, even though I have taught at the university level, I went up there, my heart was racing so much, I thought I was gonna faint. So if you can also transfer some of that empathy to the people who come and talk, many for the first time, we want them to feel welcome. Next slide. How to encourage public participation. There are many things that we could be asking ourselves about that would be helpful to the public. I think the way in which we treat technical difficulties by being patient and you know, I think the one that is most recurring is people muting themselves or not being able to unmute themselves. So this is something that we want to always communicate respect and keep trying to get them back on if we miss their chance at the first time. I wanted to say that in our city, we have done some pretty extraordinary outreach to the public. I know that the budget priorities last year and the redistricting, our city sent out massive mailers and in different languages. So again, what we are committed to, I think really shows in our actions. Chair Amadeo, I know that I don't believe you mentioned it this time, but this is one of my pet peeves too, is that we use all these acronyms. And if I were to say CUP, ADU, LCP, RFP, AFY, MST, I mean, how is the public supposed to grapple with that? And I know we've already said the term ADU. And I don't know, Richard, if you're aware, when we said ADU, we're talking about accessory dwelling unit. So again, not just for all of us, but for that are new, but also members of the public. So these are the ways in which they feel that they can follow our meetings. Next slide. How should we evaluate public comments? Too much of a good thing? Just want to caution that sometimes what we see and experience in our public meetings is not necessarily always reflective of the general population. We could have 120 people coming to talk, but maybe a good portion are from out of town, because anyone can participate from another state, from within the California as a whole. But we need to kind of look and not just evaluate based on the volume of people. Sometimes there are very vocal minorities that come to the hearings, and we might be swayed to think that the majority of people who live in Marina agree with them, and that may not be so. But so often the public gives us invaluable information and perspectives, and I think all of us have honored that. I'm just thinking about some of the very important public comments that I have really appreciated. One was on technical issues of the terrible odors that Marina residents are experiencing. There have been some wonderful public commenters that are very well informed, that really were able to communicate some very important technical, scientific kinds of information. So that was very appreciated. Certainly, we've seen lots of information on trees. That's something that is becoming more familiar to me, but I needed that kind of specific education. We have a member of the public that has very strongly and consistently reminded us at budget time and other times that our city must build in the maintenance programs and the budget to accommodate the maintenance of our infrastructures and our parks. So these are some examples that I have really appreciated over time. Next, we're going to go to the tips for the new commissioners. Some of this has been covered already. Educate yourself and do your homework. We've got lots of resources. I don't need to go over them again. They've been covered. I just want to say that in the process of educating yourself and the experience in Planning Commission, you yourself will begin to change in some respects also. And I want to give you an example. The very first application for a 4-story project in Marina, I remember hearing it, and I had a personal bias. In my head, I was thinking, wow, do we really want this kind of tall building? Is this good for us? Is the timing right? What does this say about our future development? Are we going to be skyscrapers, in the next year? So now when you look around and you see all of the developments that have successfully been planned and approved and built, this kind of thing over time is not a concern for me, because now I'm free of those biases and I can evaluate much more clearly what's put before us. Next slide, please. Tip 2, ask questions, again, for yourself and for the public as well. And we've talked about this, I think, Chair Amadeo talked about the colors of a project, but here are some other ones that have been approved that are not mandatory requirements. But again, the partnership with the developers, with the applicants, is so important, and that has to do with how we approach it, how we develop that relationship. But these are real ones that have been accepted. A developer agreed to extend the overhangs on the top windows, and we know who suggested that one. Developer agreed to a special garden design. A developer agreed to a greater tree replacement ratio. A developer agreed to fix part of a sidewalk access that wasn't on their property. So again, these could be very important elements to our approvals of projects, and all we have to do is ask. and they have the ability to say yes or no. Next slide, please. Keep your patience and your civility. Sometimes when you're listening to public comment, it's creating a lot of maybe resentment or defensiveness, or you may be just appalled sometimes by what is being said. And it's our job to not show our emotions either verbally or not non-verbally. We want to keep a very a non-committal face, a non-committal verbiage until we're ready to vote. And after that, I do hope, and I like it when we are able to say why we voted in a certain way, rather than just say yes or no. Maybe you haven't read the packet, or maybe you don't feel accountable to the public. And I think for me, if we're going to vote some way, I would hope that we explain why we're taking that position. Next slide, please. A new commissioner to contribute and make a difference for Marina. Many of the commissioners have never had any background in planning, truly, and it's probably the vast majority. I don't know, maybe there was someone at some point that did, but you were appointed, you were elected because of your intelligence, of your critical thinking ability, of your commitment to see the best things happen in Marina, and your ability to not have prejudgments and to give fair evaluations. And so these are things that are so important in any of our public offices. And I want to say that Fred Agater actually was saying that, and I say 50 years here, but he was saying the things that we make approvals of, they could be here for 100 years. And when you think about that, we want it to be the best that it can be collectively right now, and know that when we make decisions, we are making possibly very long decisions for the future generations. And last slide, I believe. Yeah, end.
Thank you, Councilmember Biala. Does anybody have any questions for the council member or for any of us as this has completed the presentations, the slide presentations? And I am looking and I am not seeing any hands raised for questions. So does anyone have any comments that they would like to contribute to the discussion tonight? And yes, Glenn.
I really just want to thank all of you. I mean, even though not a lot of it is new information to me, I think overall it's always a good reminder of this to put it back in order for all of us. So I really appreciate all the time that you took to put all this together to present to us tonight. So
Thank you. And Commissioner St. John.
Yes, I wanted to thank all the presenters. Tonight, the presentations were very, very informative. The examples were real life, real-time examples, from your service over the years here at Marina and in other cities. And anyway, it was very, very helpful to me as a new commissioner, and it opened my eyes up to, exactly at least part of what my job is. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I have one comment. I don't see any other hands up. When Councilmember Biala was discussing the daisy chain, and she said, 3 members of our board could communicate with one another, and we would not have created a Brown Act violation with council. It's 2 members. I would advise you to be very careful in doing so. If you're going to talk to another commissioner, advise them who else you may have talked to. So if you've talked to one other person, you need to advise the commissioner that you are now talking to who else you have talked to, so that that commissioner doesn't turn around and talk to one other person, because now you have 4 people involved. A daisy chain has occurred, even though there was no intent, and that is a violation of the Brown Act. I was inadvertently involved in a daisy chain at the council level. It was very embarrassing to find out when we did our ex parte communications that one of the council members had talked to another person after telling me he had not talked to anyone. And yes, it was very embarrassing. And I was the last person to speak, and I am not going to protect another commissioner or council member by not being honest with the public about my communications. And I would expect all commissioners to be the same way. So be sure, if you talk to a commissioner and then you talk to another commissioner, that you let that commissioner know who you have spoken to, so that they don't inadvertently get involved in a daisy chain communication in violation of the Brown Act. Yes, Commissioner St. John, your hand is up. Did you have something else?
Oh, he's muted.
Okay, I am
Yes,
assuming
sorry
not.
about that.
Vice Chair McCarthy, and I realize we also have someone out in the public. So I need to ask him if he would like to speak. Mr. Kennedy, if you want to say something, you can raise your hand and be recognized. And I don't even see him there. He appears to have left.
No, he's still
Oh,
here.
no, that's Commissioner St. John. Okay, so Mr. Kennedy did not raise his hand. So now I'm sorry for making that change. I didn't realize that we had a member of the public here. So Vice Chair McCarthy, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair Amadeo. I just wanted to also mention just the tremendous amount of resources that are out there. So the League of California Cities and
I was just listening. I didn't.
there might be a slight delay there. Am I okay to proceed?
His mic is muted. So yes, go ahead and proceed. I think he was just trying to tell us he was here to listen, nothing else.
Okay. Yeah, again, I just wanted to reiterate all the resources that are out there. The Planning Commissioner's Handbook is, put out by the League of California Cities and the Institute for Local Government. And they hold, and it really depends on how much individual commissioners kind of want to get involved and kind of go above and beyond. But they do hold monthly meetings. I try to listen in when I can. And, they talk about legislative updates. They talk about upcoming events, and I find them really interesting, and anyone is welcome to attend, any planning commissioner, because Marina is a League of California Cities member city. That really opens up a lot of resources to us. So if any commissioner wants more information about that, please reach out to staff, or and I'm sure they can point you in the right direction.
Thank you. We have now 2 excellent pieces of material that have been provided to us. Primarily the commissioner's workbook that we got for this meeting. I was amazed when I was reading through it, the amount of information. Not only does it give accurate information, but it gives anecdotes to explain what you're reading. So I thought that was really helpful in understanding the information that came before. I would also like to thank Councilmember Biala for bringing up the issue of acronyms. We all fall into them. And I know as a first-time commissioner back in 2005, I had a terrible time trying to decipher what planning staff was saying. And I've never been afraid to ask a question. And I think it unfortunately embarrassed planning staff that I was constantly asking what the different acronyms stood for. But I felt like if I didn't know, there might even be other commissioners that didn't know, but certainly the public didn't know. And we want to make sure that all of our communication not only informs one another, but informs the public. And so I really appreciated those comments, Kathy. And I'm hoping that our planning staff will take them to heart when they do presentations, at least the first time they say, like a CUP, they say what it stands for, and then from then on they can use the acronym. It would be a huge benefit to the public. And since we have some commissioners that have only been here 2 years and one commissioner that's only been here a couple of months, it would be very helpful. And I see Commissioner Herr has arrived.
Okay, cool.
So if there are no other comments, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Normally I would have printed it out, but I was very focused on the presentation tonight, so I failed to do that. But if there are no other comments, I think now is the time for staff to let us know of anything that is coming up, and for commissioners to do the same.
Yeah, so next meeting is going to be an ADU focused meeting. We're having Satish from Habitat for Humanity come speak to a lot of the great work he's doing in Marina. We're going to have Abode Housing. They do these prefabricated ADUs that you can build literally in like a week. And then Alec from our staff, he's a contract planner. He's been working really hard to update our webpage and put all of our handouts and forms related to ADUs on one part of the Marina webpage. So we're going to go over all of that. If you want more training as a planning commissioner, July 22nd, the Institute for Local Government is giving a one-day free training. I do believe I sent that off to all of the planning commissioners. And on May the 10th, there is a special meeting with the city council to talk about the dunes development in relationship to some trees that were removed. And you're all welcome to come to that meeting. So
I do need to let staff know that I'm having cataract surgery on June 23rd, which is a normal commission meeting. If it's done first thing in the morning at 6:30, I can probably attend the meeting, but I would like it to be known that I probably will not be able to attend, and that you should look for Vice Chair McCarthy unless he is not available, in which case we would have to make arrangements for someone else to chair the meeting at that time.
okay, thank you for the heads up. Thank you.
Okay. If there is nothing else.
Chair, could you repeat that date one more time, just so I could put it?
Yes, Thursday, June 23rd.
June 23rd.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I see a hand up again. Commissioner St. John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was my understanding that in 2 weeks, one of the meeting topics will be on ADUs.
That's correct.
Right? And I'm pretty much new to the whole ADU concept, the whole ADU process, having only been in California for less than 2 years. But I did understand that in January of this year, I believe it was, that the state passed a Senate bill, maybe Senate Bill 8 or 9, relating to ADU, saying that was now pretty much the law of the land. And,
That is correct. That is correct.
and so what my confusion is would be from a legal standpoint, does the state law of the land say trump the zoning laws of the city, where the city says this is a single family lot? And the ADU would say, well, you could really have two families.
That actually is a little more of an in-depth conversation, and we can certainly go over SB 9 if you would like, Commissioner St. John, at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Because there is quite a bit of interplay with the ADU laws. So,
Okay, thanks.
no problem.
Okay, is there anything else? I don't see any hands up, so we are adjourned.
All right.